Listen carefully. Most aspirants are still studying rural employment through the lens of 100 days of work, manual labor, and poverty alleviation. But UPSC 2026 is not testing whether you memorized the MGNREGA or not. It is testing whether you understand how the Indian state is redesigning rural governance itself. The Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajeevika Mission Gramin Act 2025 or the VBG Ramji Act is not merely a renamed employment scheme. It represents a structural transition in the philosophy of rural development. The old system focused primarily on survival through wage employment. Then the new architecture focuses on employment linked to durable economic capacity. And this is where modern UPSC becomes dangerous. Why? UPSC will not ask, UPSC will not merely ask how many days of work are guaranteed, but what will they ask? It will ask what type of infrastructure is being created, how is climate resilience integrated, how is digital governance embedded, how does physical accountability change, and how does welfare evolve into productive rural capital. They will ask all these type of questions in the examination. That is the real transition. That is the real transition. So let us first understand the historical evolution of MGNREGA to VBG Ramji. India's rural employment architecture evolved through multiple phases: rural manpower program, crash scheme for rural employment, then Jawahar Rozgar Yojana, and Sampurna Gramin Rozgar Yojana, then employment assurance scheme, and finally it converted into MGNREGA in 2005. From rural manpower program to MGNREGA in 2005. That is the flow. MGNREGA represented a revolutionary shift. Why? Because it transformed employment into a legal entitlement. But over time, rural India itself changed. The document identifies rising incomes, digital penetration, diversified livelihoods, diversified livelihoods, and expanding infrastructure connectivity as the reasons why the earlier architecture reached its structural limits. And this is the key UPSC insight: when welfare systems do not remain static, they evolve with the economy they govern. So, average students memorize MGNREGA gives employment, etc., etc. But rankers ask, why did the state redesign the employment architecture itself? What is the reason behind that? And why? That distinction changes your elimination power inside the exam hall. Let comes to the brilliant structural critique. Why MGNRA reached its limits? Why? Over time, Aadhaar-based payments expanded, digital governance improved, geo-tagging increased, Women's participation rose from 48% to 58.15%, and electronic payments became widespread. But deeper structural weakness persisted already here. What is that? What is that? Work not found on the ground. That is the main thing. Mismatch between expenditure and physical progress. Mismatch of expenditure and physical progress between misuse of machines, bypassing digital attendance, and accumulated misappropriation. This is extremely important. The problem was not merely corruption here. The deeper issue was productivity architecture. Productivity architecture is missing here. That is the deeper issue. That is the main issue. The old framework primarily measured person days generated. In other words, the success of system was evaluated through labor absorption, attendance, and wage disbursement volume. But the new architecture increasingly measures asset durability, infrastructure value, climate resilience, and long-term rural productivity. This is the real transition from quantity of employment to quality of economic capacity. The problem was architectural inefficiency, and therefore the state shifted from incremental reform to legislative reset. Notice what UPSC just connected here: welfare economics, digital governance, labor productivity, and administrative capacity, fiscal accountability, and climate linked infrastructure into one integrated governance system. This is modern prelims, not isolated schemes here, but interacting state architecture. Let comes to the new employment logic: 100 days to 125 days. Under this new framework, the employment guarantee increases from 100 days to 125 days per rural household. UPSC loves numerical evaluation traps. Remember carefully, the guarantee increases, but the architecture simultaneously becomes more structured, infrastructure linked, and productivity oriented. The 60-day agricultural pass window is this is one of the most important provisions. The act allows aggregated no work periods up to 60 days during peak sowing and harvesting seasons. Why? Because policymakers identified a major agricultural distortion. Public works sometimes absorbed labor during peak agricultural periods, creating labor shortages, wage inflation, and cultivation stress. So now the system attempts to balance farmer interests and labor protection simultaneously. This is classic UPSC governance complexity. 60-day agricultural pass window. Simply nothing but when the peak stage of agricultural sowing or harvesting period. In this scheme, for labor, 60-day agricultural pass window will be provided in this scheme. So therefore, no shortage of labor and wage inflation and cultivation stress. So these are balanced with these 60-day agricultural pass window. This is the win-win situation for farmers as well as global labor protection also. Labor also. Then we are moving to the rural infrastructure verticals. What are they? Four rural infrastructure verticals. This is the heart of the act. Employment is no longer treated merely a wage generation. It becomes infrastructural linked development. The act organizes works under four major verticals for asset creation: water security works, core rural infrastructure, livelihood related infrastructure, special works for extreme weather mitigation. These are the four major verticals. This transforms rural employment into climate adaptation, agricultural stabilization, local infrastructure building, and resilience creation. Climate adaptation, employment into this transforms a rural employment into climate adaptation, agricultural stabilization, local infrastructure building, and resilience creation. The worker is no longer merely earning wages. The worker is participating in rural state building. What is the ecosystem services logic? UPSC will not merely ask which work which work are included or not. It will ask like this: what larger economic function do these assets perform? Water security works are not merely ponds, they are hydrological resilience systems. Rural roads are not merely connectivity, they are supply chain efficiency infrastructure. Livelihood assets are not merely cattle sheds or irrigation support, they are income diversification architecture. Flood drainage and drought mitigation works are not merely public works, they are climate adaptation mechanisms. This is how modern UPSC converts schemes into systems. These are utilization for groundwater recharge, flood drainage and soil conservation. Employment policy becomes climate governance policy here. So multiple things are happening here with constructively. Building asset creation. So what are the four vertical governance matrix? Here is through water scarcity vertical, groundwater recharge will be happen. Hydrological resilience. This is the way UPSC system asked. Comes to core infrastructure. What is the structural goal? Roads connectivity and supply chain efficiency. Comes to livelihood assets. Irrigation, cattle, sheds, income diversification, weather mitigation, flood drought system, climate adaptation. So these are the four vertical governance matrix. This is extremely important because modern governance increasingly evaluates not expenditure volume but ecosystem outcomes. Let me repeat it again once. Vertical. What is the vertical here? Water security. What is the structural goal here? Groundwater recharge. What is the UPSC systems keyword here? UPSC may ask like this. Hydrological resilience. Comes to core infrastructure. Vertical. Vertical is core infrastructure. What is the structural goal of core infrastructure here is roads and connectivity. Then UPSC asking like this. What is the system keyword here from core infrastructure and roads connectivity? That is the supply chain efficiency. It leads to supply chain efficiency. That is what UPSC is expecting. Then next vertical is livelihood assets. Here structural goal of livelihood assets is irrigation and cattle sheds. Comes to UPSC, what is this? Income diversification through irrigation, cattle sheds, and etc. It will leads to income diversification. So then ultimately livelihood assets will be creating. And the fourth vertical is weather mitigation. For weather mitigation, structural goal is flood and drought systems. Comes to the system keyword UPSC, that is climate adaptation. These four vertical governance. What are the four vertical governance here is water security, core infrastructure, livelihood assets, and weather mitigation. These four are most important four vertical governance matrix in the VBG Ramji Act 2025. This is extremely important because modern governance increasingly evaluates not expenditure volume but ecosystem outcomes. When it comes to climate transition, UPSC 2026 will heavily reviewed and reward students who connect employment, ecology, and resilience. What is resilience? What is employment? What is ecology? What is between? What is among these connection? Look at the themes embedded here: groundwater recharge, water harvesting, flood drainage, soil conservation, and climate focused rural assets. Groundwater recharge, water harvesting, flood drainage, soil conservation, and climate focused rural assets. This means rural employment policy is increasingly becoming climate governance policy. Comes to the digital governance engine part. What is the digital governance engine in Viksit Bharat G Ramji Act 2025? This section is extremely high yield for UPSC. Why? Because the Act integrates AI based monitoring, artificial intelligence based monitoring, biometric authentication, GPS and mobile based monitoring, geo-tagging, real-time dashboards, and social audits. This is not ordinary administration anymore. This is digital state governance for leakages or anything or asset creations. You have to think between these two. Comes to geospatial governance. Geospatial governance projects are spatially integrated, digitally mapped, and linked to national infrastructure systems such as PM Gati Shakti. This creates a rural infrastructure stake. Very important term, rural infrastructure stake. UPSC may directly ask Which national platforms are integrated with a decentralized planning system? Let me take an statement or question for elimination alert. If UPSC states like this, the act continues purely demand based, decentralized labor deployment without national integration architecture. Mark alarm immediately, because the new framework explicitly introduces national infrastructure integration, normative allocation, coordinated planning systems, and infrastructure linked employment architecture. So the statement is wrong. The act continues purely demand based decentralized labor deployment without national integration architecture. This is the actual statement given by UPSC, for example. So this is the wrong option. Why? Because the new framework explicitly introduces like this: national infrastructure integration with PM Gati Shakti, normative allocation, coordinated planning systems with geo-tagging, etc., and infrastructure linked employment architecture, etc. So the previous given statement is wrong. So the financial architecture comes to the financial architecture. Demand based to normative funding. Old one is demand based, currently normative funding. This is one of the most dangerous UPSC areas. As far as MGNREGA largely operated through demand based funding, the new act shifted towards normative allocation rather than demand based. Now understand this carefully. Normative allocation means what? Funds are allocated through objective parameters, planned budgeting, calibrated state capacity, and predictable allocation system rather than demand based. The logic here is predictable budgeting, rational planning, and stronger accountability. This is the new framework, but UPSC will create a trap here like this. The act does not abolish employment guarantees. That clearly states the employment entitlement and unemployment allowance continue. The act does not abolish employment guarantees. This is the given statement by UPSC. Let's say, for example, in the examination, the employment entitlement and unemployment allowance continue. So this is a classic half truth trap zone. The funding model now becomes centrally sponsored. Cost sharing 60 is to 40 for most states. 60% comes from central, 40% comes from states, and 90 is to 10 for Himalayan and northeastern states. 90% funds comes from center and 10% fund comes from Himalayan and northeastern states, and 100% central funding for union territories without legislatures. Important thing, important part. Without legislatures, 100% central funding for union territories without legislatures. Again, classic UPSC federalism territory here is. So, what will be the benefits of architecture? The act attempts to simultaneously benefits farmers, laborers, infrastructure systems, climate resilience, and long-term rural productivity. Farmers benefit through labor availability during sowing seasons, irrigation support, groundwater recharge, and rural connectivity. Then comes to laborers. Laborers benefit through higher employment guarantees, digital wage payments, predictable work planning, and unemployment allowance protections. Comes to farmer benefits, labor availability during sowing seasons, irrigation support, and groundwater recharge and rural connectivity. Comes to laborers, higher employment guarantees 125 days, digital wage payments through Aadhaar enabled based payments, etc. Predictable work planning through allocative funds for creation of assets and unemployment allowance protections. This is also. So again, this is not merely a welfare system. It is a rural economic restructuring model. This is the important thing you have to identify. That is, rather than welfare system, it converts into a rural economic restructuring model through the new framework. For example, let's take one question and eliminate the options. Then we will understand the theory converts into the question. The question here is with reference to the Viksit Bharat G Ramji Act 2025. Consider the following statements. Statement number one, the Act increases the guaranteed employment period beyond the earlier 100-day framework. This is the statement number one. Then comes to the statement number two. The Act replaces demand based funding entirely with discretionary allocations by state governments. This is the second statement. And next comes to the third statement. The Act links employment generation with infrastructure creation and climate resilience works. Then comes to the fourth statement and final statement, that is, the Act integrates decentralized rural planning with the national infrastructure platforms such as PM Gati Shakti. These are four statements given by UPSC in the question. Which of the statements given above are correct? They given four options like 1 3 4, 2 3 only, 1 2 only, 1 2 3 and 4. Let comes to the breakdown of the statement each, which is correct or not. Comes to the statement 1 is correct because employment expands to 125 days. So above 100 days, 125 days means. Statement 2 is false because this is the trap. The shift towards to normative allocation, not arbitrary discretionary state allocation. The statements 3 and 4 are both correct. So Act explicitly integrates infrastructure creation, climate resilience, and PM Gati Shakti linked planning systems. So correct answer is A. So first statement and third and fourth statements are correct according to the question. The VBG Ramji Act is the bridge between the safety net India of 2005 and the infrastructure India of 2047. The old architecture focused on survival through wage distribution. through MGNREGA. But comes to the new architecture attempts to build a durable rural capital, climate resilience, infrastructure productivity, and digitally accountable governance. In UPSC 2026 to not merely look at the 125 days of employment, look at the 125 days of state building. The rural laborers is no longer merely a beneficiary of a welfare scheme. They are becoming a stakeholder in India's rural infrastructure stack. This is all about Viksit Bharat G Ramji Act 2025. This is this act made significant changes, significant framework change for Viksit Bharat happening from with this PBG Ramji Act, like 100 to 125 days, uh, demand based to normative allocation, like and four structure matrix verticals like water, core infrastructure, etc. Rural infrastructure stack comes to the digital governance, irrigation, cattle sheds, livelihood assets, four vertical governance matrix, climate resilience, weather mitigations, comes to the ecosystem services, comes to the rural infrastructure verticals, 60-day agricultural pass window, comes to the durability, infrastructure value, and ecosystem services, climate transition, digital governance through AI based monitoring, biometric authorization, authentication, GPS and mobile based monitoring, geotagging, real time dashboards, and social audits, geospatial governance linked to national infrastructure systems such as PM Gati Shakti, etc. The financial architecture like demand based to normative allocation, the federal architecture, federal structure like central sponsored scheme, 60 is to 40 to most states, 90 is to 10 to Himalayan and northeastern states, like 100% central funding for union territories without legislature. For the benefits part, comes to the benefits part, farmers, laborers, infrastructure system, climate resilience, long-term rural productivity, comes to farmer benefits, and the other one laborers benefits also. And this is also regarding about Viksit Bharat G Ramji Act and major reforms explained in this class. This is also most important topic for prelims 2026 as well as mains 2026, because MGNREGA is the biggest employment program in Indian history. This is also converted into new VBG Ramji product like framework employment rather than employment framework. It converted into infrastructure stack, rural infrastructure stack. So that is why this is most important, probable and ultra probable for prelims 2026 as well as mains 2026. All the best and thank you.